Alright, my good people, so we have some good news in the physical video game space today. I know that's not something you often hear on the internet, but it is true. Today we have good news in the world of physical video games, especially for any of you out there who are like me and have been waiting on that Black Myth Wukong physical release. It is coming, and not only is it is releasing complete on disc. You will be able to buy a copy of that game, put it in your PlayStation 5, and run every bit of content straight from your disc without ever having to connect to the internet. So, this is coming from PM Studios, the publisher who is printing the physical release for Black Myth Wukong. They said, to clarify, everything will be on disc and no internet connection is required. And they're clarifying a post that they made earlier saying, "You asked for it and we listened. We're excited to announce our partnership with Game Science to bring the highly decorated action RPG Black Myth Wukong to PlayStation 5 with a physical edition." And all of it will be right there on disc. So that is about as good news, the best possible scenario we could get for Black Myth Wukong. And yeah, it's the patience pays off, man. It's the same thing with Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is one of my most anticipated games of 2023. I was like, listen, you are a AAA company. You can afford to print this thing on a physical disc and ship it out to us. I'm not going to buy it until we get a physical release. For indies, no problem. I'll buy a digital indie game all day to support the developers. But for AAA, come on, man. You got the money. You can pony up the money to get us out a physical release. And so I waited, and the patience paid off. Alan Wake 2 is in transit right now. I think by tomorrow or the next day, I'll be getting my copy of it. And all of the DLC content is right there on disc, available day one, without, I'm pretty sure without any sort of, don't quote me on that one, I'm not 1000% certain, but I think everything is right there on disc without any downloads required for Alan Wake 2 as well, for the DLC and all that shit. So, just great news across the board for physical releases, especially for Black Myth Wukong. I will be picking up that physical copy. And I hope that it comes out before the end of the year. That way I can at least dive into it for a few hours before, I do my game of the year ranking. All right. And next up, I want to share this with you all. This is coming from Christopher Dring over at gamesindustry.biz. And he says, looking only at AA and AAA games released this year in Europe, PS5 game sales are at 32% physical. Xbox Series X and S are at 19% physical. Keep in mind, Series S is only digital. And Switch sales are at 65% physical. And he says it does vary greatly from game to game. So, and also the data is coming from Game Sales Data, a company out of Europe who obviously tracks game sales data. So, and I should mention, Does It Play? A great Twitter account. If you are a physical video game fan, you should absolutely follow Does It Play. They said, just comparing games which have both options, or does the digital side include digital-only games, DLC, microtransactions, and all of that misleading stuff again. So what they're referring to is anytime you hear digital is 90% and physical is about 10%, and that's the quote that you hear all the time, 90-10% split. It's total bullshit, because those publishers are accounting for mobile, they're accounting for DLC, microtransactions, all that shit that Does It Play just listed out there. That is very, very misleading when you want to get a somewhat reliable figure. And I think that this is what Christopher Dring is pointing at. Looking only at AA and AAA games released this year in Europe, that's where we need to get these figures from. Looking only at AA and AAA games. So, and Does It Play brings up a good point. There are games like Black Myth Wukong that is, I think, the second best-selling game of the year so far. And it only so far has only released digitally. So if that's accounted into looking only at AA and AAA, then the second best-selling game of the year is factored into an equation where it will drastically sway the percentage towards digital. You know what I'm saying? So still could be, I still would be curious about what all is factored in to how game sales data, how they came up with this exact figure. But regardless, I do think that this is more in the lines of reasonable. I do think that game sales are maybe a 32, like a 30-70 split, physical versus digital, like digital, taking up about 70% of that pie chart and physical taking up about 30% on PlayStation. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, and I don't think that's a negative at all. I think if you have an audience who is showing you consistently that about 30% of people prefer to play their games in this one method, you are not going to stop releasing games. You're not going to quit printing discs and potentially lose 30% of your customer base. It's just, it doesn't make any financial sense whatsoever. So I think this is actually pretty damn good news, and I'm kind of even surprised to see Xbox at close to 20%. That's pretty shocking to me. And also counting Series S sales into that as well, which are 100% digital. So that's probably up a little bit as well, maybe 25, maybe even close to 30 for Xbox. Probably a little bit lower, but regardless. And then Switch, you see at 65%. I remember everybody talking about, you think Switch 2 will Switch 2 go all digital? Nintendo is never going, I shouldn't say never. Nintendo is not going all digital for a long, long time. Their fan base has shown year after year, decade after decade, that they very much prioritize physical media in a big way. So I just think this is great. Great news across the board for physical games. And I want to show you some anecdotal evidence for more great news for physical games. Let me share my screen here with you all. Okay, cool. So I jotted some notes down about this. As you're going to see, this is my 2024 Game of the Year ranking. And well, it's not my ranking. It's just that, like, this is in no order. This is all the games I've played so far in 2024 that have released in 2024. I'll obviously be adding to this over throughout the year. And I have a couple in here that are about to release that I went ahead and plopped in. That way I wouldn't. Regardless, these are the games of 2024 that I'll be ranking at the end of the year. And I went through and jotted down some notes. So there are in total 47 games here on this list. And out of the 47, there's only 12 that have not gotten a physical release. Only 12 games on this entire list that I've played out of 47 or am going to play that have not gotten a physical release. Out of those 12, 11 of them are indie games. And the only one I would say is somewhat in that AA-ish space is the casting of Frank Stone. And the casting of Frank Stone, obviously, is in the Dead by Daylight universe, which is primarily all of their sales come through digitally, through, different skins and all of the monetization elements that they employ. So I would assume that Behavior Interactive, I would assume their data is a little bit skewed on the physical versus digital. So they're probably looking at their sales and being like, hey, well, I don't know if the casting of Frank Stone would sell all that well physically because all of our sales are coming in digitally. And you see with all of the other Supermassive games, or all of the other Supermassive games, tongue twister there, but all of the Supermassive's other titles have released physically, other than the one that is in the Dead by Daylight universe. So I don't like Directive 8020 when it comes out. I believe that's backed by, I think Bandai will be publishing that again. I imagine that will have a physical release. I think this is a weird one-off for Supermassive. I don't think that's indicative of anything other than it being inside the Dead by Daylight universe and Behavior not wanting to not wanting to print a physical release for it. So yeah, man, that's it for me. I just this hit me. It was like a storm of like a bunch of positive news in regards to physical media or physical games, and we don't often get that. Like I said, a lot of dooming and glooming about physical games. So this is just, I wanted to share it with you all because this is something that made me, I was like, damn, okay, cool. This is actually good news. And it lifted my spirits a little bit because I obviously love physical video games and I want them to stick around. And yeah, so this is just some good news that it made me happy and I wanted to share on that positivity to you all. So that's what the fuck this is.